everybody. Episode number 27 of Balls to the Walls. Kenny Matthews and my main man, Billy Martin Jr. on assignment in Arizona. A little spring training. Looks beautiful, my man.
Yeah, it's couldn't be any prettier than it is right now. Hopefully I'm going to get to see some good baseball on here because it's the first time I've been in spring training in 3 years because of COVID. So awesome.
Nice. We definitely appreciate you guys listening to us on this beautiful Wednesday morning here in the Metroplex, very early in Arizona time, a couple hours behind us. I forgot that they did not move the clocks a couple of weeks ago, so they're 2 hours behind us. But we do appreciate you listening to us. We appreciate if you would subscribe to us on YouTube, Rumble, and Anchor and Spotify. You can listen to all of our past Balls to the Wall type on our podcasts. We really appreciate if you can like us on Twitter and Facebook also. We do bring on any suggestions, anything that you want to tell us that we could do better, or if there's something that you really want to talk about that's really got you jazzed up, we would love to chime in with you. Billy, it's been a wonderful kind of week. The last couple of days have been filled with a lot of sports, a lot of stories. I want to try to get to them as quick as I can because I know you've got to go. But man, let's talk about the first thing that you've been on this for a while, and it is the suit between Mark Cuban and Donnie Nelson, the little whistle. It looks like Donnie Nelson wants to get his money back that he did not want to sign that disclosure form, to go away and not be able to talk about why he was relieved of his duties. And man, let me tell you, this is huge news.
Well, and before we even talk about it, roll back the clock a little bit. And
go ahead, I'm listening still.
Donnie's father, Don, sued Mark Cuban many years ago over a contract breach.
Right.
And I forget the exact number. It was in the millions. It was somewhere between 3 and 7 million, I believe. Right. And while he was in the middle of that lawsuit and was fired, his son Donnie, who you just mentioned, did a handshake agreement with Mark Cuban on his contract.
Right.
And I still would have loved to have been at the dinner table to hear Don Sr. saying, "You did a handshake agreement with the guy that I'm suing for millions." He actually did win that lawsuit and used that money to purchase more land in Hawaii.
Right.
And appropriately named that land Cubanville. But here we are years later, and now Donnie's following in his father's footsteps, and there's no telling how much Donnie knows about that guy. And he was such a loyal soldier to him for so many years, and put up with things that I doubt many other GMs could have. Think about, the Greek Freak should be a Dallas Maverick. Had Donnie had his way, had Mark Cuban listened to his general manager, who he was paying to be his general manager, who it looks like he's going to be, and looks like he's going to be paying him even more handsomely as time rolls on. But he didn't listen to Donnie. And to his credit, not long after that, I believe he told Donnie that basically the next time I usurp you or, bring it up, I won't do it again, because Donnie was obviously right. The Greek Freak was a freak. And so Donnie played that card on Luka Doncic. And, in retrospect, had Donnie been able to just do his damn job, I bet they would both be Dallas Mavericks right now. And would there be a team?
I guess the only thing we would say is if the Greek came here and they won a few more ball games than they would have the year before, maybe they might not have been able to draft them. But yes, I do agree. There was a damn good shot we could have had both of them.
Oh, well,
and there would be your two stars.
I mean, just wrap your head around that. Two of the top 5 players in the NBA on the same team.
Under age 25.
Wow. Yeah, so we'd only be good for a decade or so. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to me with this, obviously the sexual abuse that was going on in this country for so many years has come to a heightened alert button now. And, there were so many cover-ups over the years and, Jerry Jones, I mean, there's so many people that have, that had money and they were able to have the power to wipe that away with green. And now you've got people that are saying, you know what, I'm going to stand up for my rights. I'm going to, make this public now. And I think that, for me personally, it's wonderful to see because I do feel like, me being a Black individual, yes, we've been oppressed for a number of years, but females have been oppressed for, God, since the day of time,
Right.
And it's, it's a shame that, us males in a male dominated world feel like that we have power because of it. And then it's getting exposed at a rapid pace now. And I just, how do you go away from this, Jerry Jones or Mark Cuban now with these kind of things hanging around, because this society is not forgetting anymore, they're really not. So, for little whistle, Donnie, he doesn't need the money. So it's a great deal for him because here's a man that can't afford, to take him to court or do whatever he needs to do because he's not destitute. He could stand for principle here at this point in time. And if he does, just think about it, what a breakthrough that would be, Billy, if he does win this case. Do we hear other situations from other owners, that have done these kind of things or people in CEOs or whatever, because this is going to be big. I mean, it's got notoriety, it's got flash, Mark Cuban being involved in anything's got flash. Donnie Nelson Jr. still has a big name, in the basketball world. I mean, it could go, it could be big. It could be big, Billy. I mean, it really, really can.
It really could. And look,
go ahead.
I've got nothing great things to say about Donnie. I mean, he's such a class act.
Right.
There's no telling what he knows, what he's kept under wraps.
Yeah, that's what I was.
How loyal he's been to Cuban. And, and think about what Cuban did to him. I mean, Cuban was taking the advice of a gambler.
Yeah.
Not a basketball guy. Donnie Nelson has signed more international basketball players than anybody in the history of the NBA. He's actually signed more different people from more different countries than any GM in history. And, and we're not talking just okay guys,
Right.
We're talking about Hall of Fame type guys. And I don't know. I think how loyal he's been. And for it to end like this, I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty big, flaming neon light blinking, I told you so. And you should have stayed loyal to me because I would put up with so much. And this is going to be as interesting a story as we've ever seen, I think.
We've talked about before here, man, talk about tarnishing legacies. I mean, this carries some big time weight on that, man. And I mean, Mark Cuban has rubbed people the wrong way, but for the most part, he seems to be very well liked, by the majority. He's got his, he's popular as all get up, and he's he's a billionaire. We all know that. But, sometimes you can have all the money in the world, but, when your name gets drug in the mud like that, man, pretty tough, when you got kids that you got to deal with, you got a wife that's got to go through all that.
and we don't even know. Hey, there's certain things that happen. When the Patriots owner got caught getting a hand job at the massage parlor, okay. I was kind of one of those things where I totally understand something like that, because can you imagine doing that to yourself if you had to wear 5 Super Bowl rings? So I get it, but this one's going to be a little deeper.
That's great. We'll definitely end with that. We do appreciate you listening to this on Balls on the Wall here, episode number 27. We want to go over some hot stove news from life. It was blowing up when we were taping last Wednesday. I'm looking at I wrote down just a few things here. We talked about, I should say you brought him up, was Tracy Story. He signs with Boston yet 2 days ago, a 6-year deal for $140 million. Billy, do you think that the shortstop market kind of got squeezed a little bit, because him and then Correa, signs a 3-year deal for $105 with, yes, the Minnesota Twins. I did say that right.
3 1-year deal.
The Minnesota Twins stepped into the free agent foray here. These guys were thinking $250 million, contracts probably, 3 or 4 months ago. $140 million is nothing to, sneeze at. Of course not. 105 for Correa. He was thinking maybe 300. Do you think that they maybe kind of just, thought they were going to get all this and they maybe played their hand a little early here? Or is it just maybe owners saying, no, hey, we need to not just keep escalating these salaries at this kind of a pace. We need to show some restraint. Do you think the owners have that capability?
Yeah, I do. I actually do, especially in light of what's happened the last couple of years and the money they've lost. And I think maybe those guys overplayed their hands a little bit. But, you look at Trevor Story in Boston, and man, he makes that lineup really look good. But, I wonder if there was any thought of him playing in his hometown and being a Texas Ranger, because, he said he'd move over to second base for Bogarts. Would he not have done that for Seager? And look, and I love Marcus Semien, don't get me wrong, but Trevor Story, his power is, Mickey Mantle type power. When he's locked on, there's no telling. And to have that local kid that's a great father was a fireman, his mother's a teacher. They're just Americana, and to have that kid at home, I don't know, that would have been neat.
Well, let me play devil's advocate with you on that with the Rangers. Do you think that if the Rangers would have known he would have taken a 6-year, $140 million deal to even make the move for Seager at $325? Do you make the move?
No, you make a great point there.
240, 250. Do you maybe not sign one of those two? Because the price tag was, that's significantly lower than what we all anticipated, and so.
No. That turns it into a buy one, get one free discount, right? I
just wondered if somewhere John Daniels is going, where was this 4.5 months ago? I would have signed you up for $150 million for 60 years. It still went either after Seager or Semien. I just wonder. I wonder if the Yankees even thought that Correa would have signed a 3-year deal for $105 million. I really, everything we heard, he was wanting 6 and 7 years. So. I think the Yankees were afraid of trying to put that one on top of the Garrett Cole, plus trying to sign Aaron Judge, I think that they were saying, man, I don't know if we can have 3 blockbuster, type salaries here running around and plus Stanton's, 7 more years on his contract. But are we maybe getting somewhere where the little guy gets to play, in this free agent game now when Minnesota spends $105 million on a shortstop? If that's the case, Billy, I'm all for it. I'm for balance. You're
right. But the Yankees is a great point.
Yeah,
because they've got 2 really good prospect shortstops right at the verge. A kid named Volpe and a kid named Peraza.
Yeah.
And signing Correa to a deal like he just signed, he's got the ability to opt out after each of the next 2 years if he wants to. And so that might be a perfect scenario for them to have him step in this year. And I always wonder why they don't say, here, let's just blow out the AAV and we'll pay you $45 million for 1 year, and I think we're going to see stuff like that start to happen.
Well, in essence, that's what your dad played for a lot of those years. It was renewable contracts by the Yankees. They owned his rights. He didn't sign no 2 or 3 year deal as a player. They basically each year said, here's a $500, reduction, even though you batted 300 last year. But I think that it would keep people on there. Well, let's just say this. Maybe people fight through pain. Maybe some players play through pain because they know they're paying for their contract. I think sometimes those players say, man, I've got 5 more years. It's guaranteed. I'm not going to rush this or fight through it. Or you have people that kind of relax on their laurels a little bit. Hey, I've just signed a 7-year deal. I don't have to hit this off season the way I did before when I was hungry, looking for that deal. It takes a special person to get that kind of money and then still do the same work or not work harder, for it. I think it's human nature, to kind of get there and say, I finally have reached this pedestal. And, I look at this. Who are the Dodgers going to blame for their bullpen woes now that Hanley Jansen signs with the Braves? That guy has been the whooping boy for the last 5 years in that organization. And last year, if you look at his numbers, he was damn good, Billy, last year. He really was. He was really good in the playoffs last year. That's a big hole for the Dodgers, I think. Now, don't get me wrong. The Dodgers have got one of the best farm systems when it comes to pitching prospects, in MLB. So, it's easy to kind of maybe plug one of those young guys in the back end and get something out of it. But I think it's a significant hole that they haven't filled just yet anyway.
They got some pretty good in-house candidates. It's going to be, spring training's going to flush out. The typical closer role, I think, is really starting to disappear. And
I agree with you there.
And I don't know that I like that, to be honest with you, because, I think players like having defined roles.
Absolutely.
Understanding that role. And we're talking about one of the mentally toughest things to do in sports, because you're coming in when the lights are the brightest, all the pressure's on, they're the toughest 3 outs of the game, and your arm's different every night. Some nights it's great. Some nights you don't have your curveball for some reason. It's different every time. But
range game. After
you go out and blow it, you go out and blow a save, and you're sitting back in the locker room, and my buddy Kenny just threw 7 2/3 scoreless innings, and I just blew up the 9th inning and cost him the W. And got to look at everybody else in the dugout who was looking forward to putting that win up, and I blew it. And guess what? Tomorrow night, I may be coming out in the exact same situation. So I've got to flush the damn toilet, clean my freaking memory banks, and come back out lean, mean, fighting machine. And, not everybody's wired for that. Most people can't let it go. They swim in it, and it's the ultimate. It's funny. if we could all have that mentality about most things in life, you know, I don't know what I got my arm in tonight, but I'm going to kick your butt with it. And oh, by the way, if I don't, I will tomorrow night.
Well, and think about this. One example of that. Remember last year, Chapman for the Yankees, he basically was demoted in the month of August, because he couldn't get anybody out. He couldn't throw strikes, So you're thinking about a borderline Hall of Fame ace, closer in Chapman that can just lose it for a 6 or 7 week stretch during a season. Yep. It's here, his arm didn't get any worse. He still threw 102 or 101. He just didn't have any movement on the ball or whatever it may have been the case. And, I think that another thing is, I think the people are trying to build their bullpens for having two guys, because they want a 1 and a 1A closer. So when that one, when their closer can't close it because he's pitched 3 nights and 4 days or whatever, they can roll the other guy out during that time. So you may get 65 or 70 appearances for 2 of those guys in game winning situations. I understand the premise, but like you and I both have said, structure makes people work. Structure knows what they're defined, either their limitations or what they know they're expected to be counted on. And I said, you've got 8th inning guys, you got 7th inning guys, you got 6th inning guys now. I read a stat over the weekend, and you'll get a real big kick out of this. The average start was below 5 innings for all starters in last year's season, under 5. So you're now telling me that you got relievers pitching half of the game now. You've got your bullpens doing that. How much longer can it go at this pace? You can't shell out all that money for a starting pitcher for 4 2/3 innings anymore. Don't you have to stretch that money out somewhere to the 6th, to the 7th inning, you think? I don't know. There's not enough arms in America to feed 11-man bullpens, they're just not, And as you said before, it's a lot more mental sometimes than just rearing back and throwing.
Yeah, it sure is. And you're right. The starting scenario is so different. Remember we were talking about complete game leaders 20 years ago, and there were guys literally, with things like 20 complete games. And now last year's league leader, Germán Marquez was one of the 3 with 3 complete games. And we don't know that those weren't 7-inning doubleheader games last year. So who knows?
Hello, Mr. Dan Vaughn. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. You guys hear me? Yes.
Thumbs up. We can hear you perfectly, man.
I didn't know this was going to be video. I would have dressed up.
Well, I've just got me an OU sweat top. He's got a polo out in Arizona.
I'm wearing the Monarchs tees.
You got your Monarchs on. That works perfectly. Let me introduce you to everybody. This is Dan Vaughn, the radio announcer of the Kansas City Monarchs of the American Baseball Association. We told you last week we wanted to have him come in and talk about the Monarchs and obviously about Jackie Robinson coming up. And Dan, we appreciate you giving us a couple minutes here, man. We love you to death, brother. And it's always good to catch up with you and talk hot stove.
It's good to see both of you. I've known both you guys 30 plus years. That's like 70 years and like 140 in dog years. So we're old, but good to see y'all.
Who would have ever thought that we'd be meeting in a forum like this when we met in August of 1980, Danny?
No kidding. And of course, Billy and I were in tech together and doing mass media. Back then we had to use typewriters and stuff. And who would have thought we'd be doing that? Boy, that's a crazy world we live in, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, this is great. Well, Danny, first, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for the Monarchs, and then we'll start talking about Jackie and all that other stuff, because, obviously Billy was part of that, the American Baseball Association also with the Air Hogs. So, you guys come full circle around, doing all this. So
absolutely. Well, I'm the play-by-play voice, director of media relations for the Kansas City Monarchs and the American Association. We're based there in Kansas City, Kansas, on the Kansas side, but they're in the Metro Kansas City area, play at Legends Field there in KCK. If you know the area of Kansas City, we're right across from the Speedway, right next to Sporting KC, about 20-minute clip from downtown, and we're right off I-70 and just right there, that hub of activity in KCK, and we're reigning American Association champions.
Yes, you are.
In 2021, and just been a really heck of a good role for the Kansas City franchise lately, and just very blessed to be telling the Monarchs story. I was just telling a gentleman earlier, I was doing an interview a little bit earlier, that there's no broadcaster in all sports that has this front row seat to really celebrate what a great legacy the Monarchs are and tell the story of really a forgotten history, unfortunately, of our great game.
You bring up an excellent point. A lot of people, when you bring up Jackie Robinson, a lot of people associate him with the Montreal Expos. And, I tell people before, it started before that, with the Kansas City Monarchs. And I think that was where kind of the groundswell kind of began there. I think that's when Branch Ritchie wanted to find out if Jackie Robinson was strong enough mentally to be able to turn the other cheek and make that jump to the MLB. And, Danny, he's a phenomenal player, but he's probably 10 times better the person than he was a Hall of Fame player.
And I think that's the key. There were a lot of really good players then. You could go down, and Satchel Paige was probably as well known of a player in the Negro Leagues there was. You think about him. You think about some of the other guys, Josh Gibson. Yep. Gibson had some health problems in the 1943, 44, but he was still playing. Josh Gibson had 8 home runs in the Negro Leagues that year, which led the league. So there were players probably talent-wise equal, if not maybe more deserving from a sabermetric stats kind of thing.
Right.
But this position, being the first to re-crack the barrier, because there'd not been a black player since Fleet Walker back in the late 1800s, to re-crack that barrier again, it needed someone to be able to put up with all the nonsense, and you've seen the movie and you've heard all that, all the crap that he had to put up with, and also be able to turn to the cheek and also play and do all the things he could do. I think Jackie was the perfect person, and I think you're right on. He was a hell of a ball player, obviously, talented guy, could play multiple sports. As a matter of fact, when he goes into Kansas City with the Monarchs, the previous offseason, he'd been playing independent football out in California. So the guy was a running back. He was also coaching at a college in Austin at the time, college basketball. The guy was a heck of an athlete. He could pretty much play whatever sport he wanted to. He was also a heck of a person. So you needed that unique person to be able to, because it was uncharted waters for anyone. And he had to be able to chart those waters. And I'm not saying those other guys couldn't, but you got to know Satchel Paige's story, who was the ultimate showman. Satchel was way ahead of his time. He was LeBron before LeBron, and he was way ahead of all these stars now. Satchel Paige was really the guy that, hey, look, I'm the guy to bring crowds in. That's not what Major League Baseball needed. They had crowds. He needed somebody to cross that barrier and to slowly open up the door. And that's what they got in Jackie Robinson, a heck of a person.
Yeah. The thing. Go ahead, Billy.
Well, the movies, I wish I'd known about the movie when they were making it, because Mickey Mantle told me a great story. And it kind of shows how racism hurts everyone in a weird way. But in the 53 World Series, my father tied 2 other players with 12 hits in a 6-game series. He was MVP of that World Series. But Mickey Mantle told me this story, posthumously after my father had passed, that my father hit a ball on the other side of second base, on the Pee Wee Reese side of second base in that series. Jackie ranged all the way basically into left field, dove complete layout for that ball, and it just barely tipped the end of his glove. He couldn't quite get there. Mickey said everybody in the building knew it was a hit. So first of all, even if he could have gotten all the way there and made the play, there's no way he gets up, rights himself, and threw out your old man. He goes, your father could run pretty good, but he couldn't have thrown out Yogi Berra there because he was so far into left field on his dive. And he said, besides that, he didn't get there. And nobody had more range than he did at that position anyways. And he said the official scorer called that an error, and they didn't know and assumed that the official scorer was probably a racist and wanted to give Jackie Robinson an error. And in the process, cost my dad what then would have been an all-time record in a 6-game series with 13 hits. And it's a terrible all-around thing. I guess unless you're the pitcher. But you know, that would have been a neat thing to show in that movie because it really happened.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up an interesting story too from the movie. I had a chance to work with the Bregan family, Peter Bregan Sr., Peter Bregan Jr. Well, brother Bobby, who was spent his latter years in Fort Worth, great baseball ambassador. He was actually the focus of the Southern players in the movie, that wooden room of Jackie. And I remember Uncle Bobby saying years later, I remember talking to him at the winter meetings, that the best thing ever happened to Bobby Bregan was meeting Jackie Robinson. Yeah. That was the best thing that ever happened to him. Not, you know, in the movie they're portrayed as, you know, being racial bigots and all that, but they come around, and what you don't see is the impact Jackie had on people like Bobby Bregan and like those, you know, the Dixie Walkers of the world, those kind of players who were very adamantly against being in the same bus, much less the same hotel, same clubhouse. But the impression, the kind of person he was, and the teammate he was, never was lost on Bobby Bregan until the day he died. And I remember Bobby talking about that many interviews over and over again in the Fort Worth paper, the Dallas paper, both, and about how important that relationship was and how that was the best thing that ever happened to him as a player.
Well, you know, even Carl Esking was huge back during that day because he was not one of those that wanted to sign that petition back in the day. And I mean, he's one of those highly respected guys that you'll ever meet. And for Jackie to be befriended by him and Pee Wee Reese, who was the captain basically of those teams back then, sheds two different lights for me. They respected him as a person first, obviously, because they knew, you know, we're going to take some heat for this, you know, by doing this, obviously, by your own team and your own manager, your own clubhouse, the whole shooting match. And then you got to take on everybody else, you know, at that point in time. So they knew that if we're going to stick our neck in our line, Jackie must have proven his worth for them to be able to do that as an individual. And secondly, they knew they had a damn good ball player too. You know, they were hoping that it was going to win them some World Series games, you know. So, I mean, you got both of that, but they had to obviously know that Jackie was worth doing something like that.
You know, something else that I don't know, it was addressed in the movie, but his wife, Rachel, I believe her name was, what do you think she had to endure during those games? I mean, I know some of the things that happened to my mother and I at games that my father managed. Obviously, my father was a colorful personality, but can you imagine what inebriated fans must have said and done to her during games? You know, and nobody ever addresses that. But I have literally been at a game in Kansas City, by the way, and had a man leaning against my mother and my leg into the dugout yelling, "Hey, Billy, I slept with your wife last night," and having no idea that he was literally leaning against his wife, my father's wife, and me, until the police came and grabbed him and cuffed him and ironically told him that, "Oh, and by the way, you classless jerk, that was his wife you were leaning on." And it was funny because then the man, all of a sudden, you could tell it made him feel bad because all of a sudden they were human beings that he was messing with and not cartoon characters.
Right.
But I can't imagine back then the stuff they endured. And obviously they show a lot of it during the film, but man, there must have been so much we'll never hear about.
Yeah, and one of the things that the Monarchs experienced, he only spent 5 months in Kansas City with the Monarchs. And he, again, just to fast forward the story here, goes to the court-martial trial because he wouldn't, move to the bus, and his unit goes overseas. He doesn't serve with his unit overseas in active combat because he's in the whole court-martial trial. He eventually winds up being transferred to the fort in Kentucky when he finally is acquitted of the court-martial, and he's, eventually discharged, honorably discharged. But he runs into a gentleman who says, hey, you should contact this team in Kansas City. I believe his name was Ted Alexander, who tells him, hey, you should contact these guys in Kansas City. Here's their, I don't think it was their cell number, but here's how to get a hold of them, right? And he goes back down, and of course he went to California, does the football thing. He's also coaching basketball. He goes to tryout down in Houston and makes the team with no trouble. I mean, he makes the Monarchs spring training in 1945 was done in Houston, and he makes the team with no trouble. Everybody's excited, believes they're the league favorites again to win it all. They didn't have a great year in 1945. They finished at 500, but didn't win the pennant. But what he endured as a Monarch, and what you understand about the Negro Leagues in 1945 and really throughout history, was this was not first-class travel, first-class hotels, and they traveled together, obviously, but the hotels were not open to them. Places to eat weren't open to them. A lot of times they get to a town, the rooms wouldn't be ready, which is not uncommon even this day and age, but rooms weren't ready because there were no rooms. There was not a hotel for them, or the restaurant wasn't going to serve them until a certain time, until ever the white customers have been served. I mean, he went through all that, riding those bumpy buses. This is not the 1920s and 30s when the Monarchs traveled by Pullman car throughout the country, which is what they did in the early years. They're on a bus, and it's bouncing around this is interstate system in its infancy, basically, and they're bouncing around these buses, sleeping wherever they could, oftentimes changing on the bus. They didn't have a clubhouse for them, playing wherever they could play. It was a hard existence, and I think that hardened existence of the Negro Leaguers, because Jackie was like, we came from UCLA, the West Coast, a lot more forgiving racial situation in the West Coast. There was Jackie's first road trip goes from Houston to Birmingham / Atlanta down the deep South. Talk about a welcome to baseball in the Negro Leagues. We're going to take you to the most racially divided part of the country. And oh, by the way, you're going to play in Ponce de Leon Park in Atlanta, and with a white section, a black section. And this was just a real unknown thing to him. And all the abuse that those guys took in general, and a lot of it wasn't so much people screaming at him, because people love to see the Negro League. The Negro Leaguers are popular. They'd go to these towns, and they were there goes my dog. Sorry about that.
That's right. It's okay.
But these Negro Leaguers would go to a town, and they'd be the only entertainment. And so people came out of the woodwork to watch real baseball players and guys they'd read about. But it was the grueling life of the road. This is not. You think about the minor leaguers now, the American Association, what we do, traveling from Winnipeg to Texas or whatever. This is nothing compared to what those guys went through. And Jackie went through all that before the August meeting with Branch Rickey in 1945, and he's talking about what can you turn the other cheek and all that, still be good, all the things that you see in the movie. But Jackie was set up for that by going that 1945 5-month season with the Monarchs. And what was great life for a black athlete in 1945 to play with the Monarchs, it hardly was major league standards.
No. And not only that, Danny, if you really think about it, they didn't make a lot of money either. So it's not
No. But the one thing I will tell you, just the Negro Leaguers in general, it was a ball player's life. Now, granted, we're talking about a ball player, even in the white major leagues. A lot of these guys, and Billy probably can attest to this. I don't know what his father's situation was, but a lot of guys, Mickey Mantle had off-season jobs. It wasn't uncommon.
Oh, absolutely.
So back in these days, you're playing in the Negro Leagues, which was even harder. And they all had a lot of these Negro Leaguers played year round. They would play barnstorming leagues in the winter, and they would do that. It was what they would do because it was the way out for them, so to speak, especially guys from the South.
Sure.
A lot of the guys from the South really dove into the barnstorming. They played down in Mexico, played in Puerto Rico, played in Cuba. Those were big leagues in the winter. They paid, and talk about money. Back in the 1940s, a player could go play in Mexico or Cuba and make some bank, and then come back, play domestically in the summer. And, they did it was a pretty good lot, but yes, they weren't making $10 million a year to be a utility player. I mean,
well, to put that financially into perspective, yes, Mickey Mantle had to work in the offseason.
Right.
My father certainly did. But they were lucky enough at least to be Yankees in the 50s when they were winning the World Series every year. If they won, my father was getting paid about 10 grand then. And so if they won the series, he then got a check for $6,700. Well, that was enough money for him to sustain himself in New York and live until spring training. Otherwise, he was getting on the train, going back to Berkeley, working in the penicillin plant, or selling cars, or both. So, it was absolutely a different world.
Yeah, different times. And I even thought about this too. Can you imagine, let's say it's social media back then, can you imagine what kind of abuse those guys would have taken the Negro Leagues? Can you imagine Twitter was around back then, the abuse that Jackie Robinson would have taken? I mean, think about it. Now we dogpile on the guy who misses the free throw, right? Or the guy who makes the error. Imagine them dogpiling on players back then because of the color of their skin. I mean, it'd have been unbearable. I'm thankful for our times. There are times I'm not thankful. There are times I am thankful. This is one of those times. But the amazing thing I will tell you guys is, and Kitty, you've heard me talk about this on my shows with the Monarchs. It's the education I'm getting, because I like to think I'm a career baseball guy. I think I know a little something. I know a lot. I mean, I know a little bit about Billy's family, his dad and Mickey and the Yankees. I mean, who doesn't know those great stories, right? But unfortunately, the Negro League story has not been told nearly enough. And I have dived into that whole full bore as a broadcaster, and I am so blessed to do that. I'm learning something new all the time. For example, I just stumbled across a little tidbit that I didn't know this, but Jackie, when he signed with Brooklyn, his wife went ahead of him and she was a nurse at the time, was going to try to see if she could secure some kind of job in the New York area as a nurse. I didn't know that Jackie actually, in the 1945 season, I think I told you, they went from Houston in early April to Birmingham to Atlanta, New Orleans. He left the team early April to go to a phantom tryout at Fenway Park in Boston that was initially canceled because Roosevelt died. Wow. And Truman became president, and they rescheduled later on that week. If you've read about that tryout, which I didn't know a lot about it, it was sort of a dog and pony show. Just kind of, all right, we're going to do this to appease the city councilman in Boston. We're going to let him try out. A couple of the players are with him. It was kind of a sham. No one got signed, and he was back in the Negro Leagues a week later. But a lot of folks don't know that he actually had a tryout in Fenway Park early in 1945, in April of 1945. Wow. And these are things I'm learning all the time. So what I'm telling you is that there's a lot out there that we constantly are learning, that a forgotten history. And there's so many young baseball fans who have no idea about the history of the Negro Leagues and the Josh Gibsons and the Oscar Charlestons and those kind of players. Satchel Paige. I mean, Satchel Paige should be he could be an own HBO special for months, because Page's story is incredible. And the story of these guys has been lost in history, unfortunately.
Well, I know, Billy, you may have to run, so I know. I appreciate you giving us a couple moments there. My man Billy's over there in spring training with a couple of his clients. So
yeah. Yes, I do have to go. I wanted to be wearing, when I was in Kansas City with the Air Hogs, we all went to the Negro League Museum, and I bought a t-shirt. I had to. The players really thought it was funny, but I wanted to be wearing my Atlanta Black Crackers shirt, which I thought that was such an oxymoron. I had to get that. But there are so many interesting stories that people don't know. Yeah. My father and Mickey Mantle would stay on the bus with Elston Howard if the restaurant wouldn't serve him. But to try to, I don't know, not play it up big, they'd say things like, "We're going to stay on here and be Elston's bodyguards," and kind of lighten the racial tension. But was a big deal back then. And there really, people don't have a clue on just how much they had to go through. And I take a lot of pride in the things Dad did. He also roomed with the first Black player in the Pacific Coast League, Artie Wilson. And I know he took a lot of crap for that and got into fights over it because he loved Artie and he didn't give a damn. And something I'm very proud of, but we need to do this again.
Yes, we do.
You guys are awesome. And sorry, I got to go, but
I understand. You go enjoy it, have an adult beverage or two and have some peanuts and hot dogs. I'm very envious, but enjoy your day, Billy.
I will be in Kansas City this year. Yeah. I will be in Kansas City this year, so we're going to hook up, okay?
I'm looking forward to seeing you, Billy. Always a pleasure, man. And you're always welcome in the broadcast booth with me. You know that.
Well, okay, I get a little long-winded, as you can tell, but
all good, mate.
That's great.
All right,
thanks,
see
Billy.
you guys.
Appreciate you, Danny. I would like to go on one thing. We got the 75-year anniversary. Obviously coming up on April 15th here. And from a Monarchs perspective here, are you guys? I know your season doesn't start until the end of May, June. For that, but I know you guys got to have some build-ups a little bit on that thing. And it's so great that you're the defending champion too, going into the 75th year. You couldn't have really done it much better, could you?
No, and I'll give you the one other little piece that's exciting is that Buck O'Neil goes to the Hall of Fame this summer. Right. Now, Buck O'Neil, who to refresh folks, Buck O'Neil, you may have seen him in the kid. He's known for really the Ken Burns thing. If you've seen the Ken Burns baseball series, which is phenomenal, Buck O'Neil really got a name for himself there. But Buck was the first African-American scout. He was a first African-American coach in the big leagues, a longtime Monarch, manager, player, Negro Leaguer, all these things.
He is Mr. Negro League.
Yes, and really the museum in Kansas City is there because Buck O'Neil, and Buck O'Neil is Kansas City. There's Buck O'Neil Bridge. Everybody knows Buck O'Neil. And Buck O'Neil, as a matter of fact, in the seventh inning at our ballpark, Buck always a video from the Ken Burns special, having Buck singing "Take Me Out the Ball Game." So Buck goes in the Hall of Fame this summer. Now there's already a statue of Buck O'Neil there because there's a Buck O'Neil Award already named after him, but he's actually going to have his own plaque in there. So we've got that going on, plus Jackie Robinson, plus the Monarchs. So we got all that going on. Nice. There's all those tie-ins. And so, we don't start till May 13th, but we'll be celebrating all that all summer long. And there are other clubs doing that as well. We're going to be, we've always got something up our sleeve as far as that's concerned with our partnership with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and Bob Kendrick and his group there. So there's always something, but we have a lot to celebrate with the Monarchs and that legacy in Kansas City.
Excellent. Well, I'm mad at the Baseball Hall of Fame first. When they made it eligible and they were going to put the Negro League players in, they didn't put him on that first ballot, and then he ended up passing. He was very healthy at the time, so he could have gone to Cooperstown. He could have given his speech. You can't imagine all of the living Negro League players that would have been at Cooperstown that day. Baseball missed a big golden opportunity there.
And baseball seems to miss a lot of things, and that was one of them. What I love about hearing what of course, Buck passed 07. He was not, I know. Privately, I don't know, but publicly, he was not bitter about that, and he had every reason to be bitter about that. He seemed to be. He was such a man of dignity and class, and he didn't hang his head and say, because there have been some athletes, and I'm just in different sports who may have got the snub, and they've let it on their sleeve a little bit, but he was not that way. Yeah, they're out there. And so there's one right. But Buck wasn't that way. He knew at his time, and granted, it took way too long. It was just, to me, it was a slam dunk. It's unfortunate that it took so long.
Well, it's Buck O'Neil and George Brett pretty much 1 and 1A and most popular baseball figure in Kansas City?
Yeah, I would think so. You know, Frank White would be in that mix too. Frank is our first base coach.
Great guy.
Great guy. Frank's very civic minded. Serves city council there on the Kansas side. I would say, really, it's a funny city. I think it shows it. It's like this in the Metroplex. You know, where we're from. Football's kind of taken over.
Sure.
That's just the nature of the beast. It's the game that everybody. It's a TV game. They've done a lot of things right. Where the baseball we just mentioned has done some things wrong. You know, in our city, it's the Roger Staubachs and the Spitz of the world. In Kansas City, because the Royals' success was so long, and prior to that, the Monarchs' success, and it was a 10-year stretch of the Athletics being there. But the Monarch name, Buck O'Neil, and the Royals name, George Brett, those two names are synonymous in Kansas City sport. And there have been some pretty good Chiefs come along, but now you got the face of the NFL and Patrick Mahomes there.
Yeah.
And it's you kind of got that third face now. Gotcha. And those other two older faces are sort of, but I think it speaks to what baseball's become, unfortunately. And I'm a baseball guy. We've become that way where we've kind of not celebrated the game's rights and the wrongs like we probably should have. And that's why these Jackie Robinson things to me mean so much. Yeah. And celebrating Buck O'Neil means so much because there is a Mount Rushmore in every city. And if you've got baseball, hopefully your ball player is on there. In our case in Kansas City, Buck and George are right there, and both phenomenal guys and phenomenal ambassadors for the area. But everybody,
it's big in the community.
Again, you and I know this. Yeah, you and I know this. I mean, baseball suffered some, and we got to get that right, and hope we're get it right. Hopefully.
Well, I'm thinking you have to think that April 15th at Chavez Ravine, the Dodgers are playing the Reds. That's maybe we can kind of brace some of this animosity that we still kind of got a little, bit between the races here a little bit. I mean, Jackie obviously has number been retired forever. Nobody will ever wear it again after Mario Rivera retired. Danny, isn't this a time where baseball really, Manfred and all those guys need to get on the same page and say, hey, this is all about Jackie Robinson. And then, like you said, make this going forward where we get more information out there on the history. I think you made an excellent point about how it's forgetting. I'll call them forgetting treasures. There's just a whole bunch of greatness there that we have not even begun to tap the surface of that.
I could give you 7 or 8, 9 stories that I discovered in my broadcasting and research for the Monarchs, because when we rebranded, I was like, wow, I better study up, because the Monarchs, I knew the basics. One of the best teams in the Negro Leagues, the New York Yankees, the Negro Leagues. I knew all that, and I've been to the museum, so I knew the museum story, but I didn't really know, the different timelines, the seasons, the ebbs and flows. For example, J.L. Wilkinson, who was the founder of the Monarchs, a former player who became a businessman and the founder of the Monarchs brand, was a trailblazer who didn't see color. He just saw baseball as a bonding sport. J.L. Wilkinson, for example, takes his late 1900s or 19-teens team called the All Nations team, which had American, Indian, and white, and black, you name it, they were called the All Nations team. That's what they were called. They go to this little small town in southeast Iowa that is basically half black, half white. The stands are full of all mixes of people. They're all together. He sees this crowd of people all together, black, white, doesn't matter. He's like, this is the way it should be. And that's what he always, that impression, that one experience for him in I think it was 1913. My years may be off here, but that experience resonated with him as rest of his life. And so he took the Monarchs on these barnstorming tours to white county festivals, to black county, all these different places. He didn't see color. He saw it as baseball. And I think the lesson there is not lost on me. That's the thing and I didn't know J.L. Wilkinson. He's a story you've never heard of. J.L. Wilkinson. No one's ever heard of this guy who looked like, had the fedora on, the suit, but he was the white founder, one of the only white founder of the Negro National League with Rube Foster in 1920, but no one knows about him. I didn't know about him. He's in the Hall of Fame, for crying out loud. I didn't even know this. But again, the stories are lost, and that's just one little story. I mean, there's the stories of the first lighted professional ball game played in Texas was a Monarchs game in Waco, down in where it's now the Silos area of Waco, where all that. But I didn't know that. I grew up in Texas, had no idea. So there are all these stories we're all learning.
We're baseball nuts. We don't know.
And that's the thing. And I think too, and it comes back to my responsibility as a broadcaster, Kenny, is that I at first I was a little uncomfortable with the role because I'm white. And I'm thinking, why should I be pushing that? But I realized as a broadcaster and as an evangelical believer, that hide that, Dr. King was talking to me from Birmingham in the jail. He was talking to me. And I never realize that until later in life. But my responsibility as the white modern is to tell the Monarch story and to tell the racial injustice and tell the story why that's wrong and why we should all love. And I think the best part about my seat is I can tell the story of love of baseball, of each other, of teammates, and a love of each other. In a time that we live in now, when you watch the news and you got an invasion going on here and you got strife here, we need more love and understanding and empathy. And there's no better love of a game and empathy than watching the Negro Leagues and what they went through and understand how we're all our common ground. It's, you've been there as well. You're an OU guy, or you don't look at color or skin of the fan next to you. You're high-fiving regardless, right? And that's how sports should be. And that's how sports should be, right? That's what sports are all about. And that's what baseball should be all about. That's what the Monarchs should be all about. And unfortunately, baseball didn't get it right for a long time. They finally got it right in 1945. And actually, they got it right initially in the 1880s. And then they closed the door on Fleet Walker and company, opened up again, but finally get it right. And that's the way the world should be like that. We should all be able to high five each other, regardless of race, color, and all that, and all be able to get along. And I think that this is a great example of what life should be like. We should all be celebrating the greatness of Billy's father and Jackie Robinson's legacy. These are all great stories, and we're all one big, happy baseball, sports-loving family, regardless of our race, regardless of our beliefs. That's what, at the end of the day, the love should rule the way. And I think Jackie's love of the game and love for his teammates, I mentioned Bobby Bragan, that all comes to pass, and it's a great example for us going forward. And I don't take that responsibility lightly, Kenny, at all.
I know you don't, and I think it's Jackie approves of this because we've evolved. If a white man is in the booth talking about the Negro Leagues, that's what Jackie wanted.
Exactly.
That's what he wanted.
And it's a sad, and it's like everything else in this post-pandemic and this pandemic world we live in, taking a negative, which was racism is a negative, a negative, we know no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but overcoming that and turning into a positive, and Jackie's story into a positive, and his legacy into a positive, and and there's a lot of positive out there. That's why I want to continue to tell the story, and I want to continue to unearth things like the fun stories that I've unearthed. These two guys are driving back in their little small town in Missouri. They think their hometown's on fire. They don't realize till they get to town that it's not the hometown on fire, that it's the Monarchs who've had their portable light system playing a game there in this small town of Missouri. I mean, things like that. I want to tell these stories because these are actually things that happen in despite of it all. So I'm diving in, man. As you know, I do. We dive in.
Well, we got about 3 minutes left before Zoom's going to kick us off. And I call this the irony of everything. Jackie going to the Major League Baseball was the end of the Negro Leagues because all of their best players then were going to follow suit. So you're elated that you broke through, but you knew that this was going to cater. And that's what ended up happening to the Negro Leagues, a few years later.
Yeah, it really did set the world in motion. Really, World War II with kind of kicked that into gear a little bit. They were already starting to look at players during the war because there were fewer players, and there was already talk about integrating then. Jackie goes, and then of course from then it's a trickle. You know, Dobie goes, two more Monarchs go in 1947 as well, and Willa Brown was one of them. And you go forward slowly but sure. The best players, Ernie Banks, players like that, slowly but surely. You know, Roy Campanella, these guys.
Roberto.
Yeah, your best players eventually, which is what you were hoping for. It did close the chapter on the Negro Leagues. That chapter is done, but a rich new chapter of integrated baseball, the way it should be, was open. So it's a bittersweet pill.
Yes, that's
and the Negro Leagues, they limped along to the 1960s, but for all practical purposes, from 1953 on, really, the Negro Leagues were nothing more than a minor league feeder system, and eventually they were just nothing more than history.
Yeah, but like you said, the bigger picture was great, but you saw the baby though, you know, going away slowly but surely. The black crowds were going to major league ball games. They didn't have to go to minor league games, you know, the Negro League games. So they were going to Yankee Stadium or whatever to watch Jackie play in that situation. So I think that's another reason why, you know, you got caught in that, you know, that cuffs. And I mean, hey, it's respect all the way around because Jackie broke the code and that's what he exactly wanted. But it is bittersweet to see that, you know, the Negro Leagues did go away.
And I think now his story continues. I mean, Jackie's story continues this year and every year. And there's a new baseball fan born every year, and they need to know these, or every day. They need to know these stories and his legacy. Why do we celebrate Jackie Robinson? You know, it's not just he's a great player, great person, but there's a reason why we celebrate this, and we never make those same mistakes again.
Yeah.
Because history has a really bad way of repeating itself. You watch Ukraine, you see that. You know, you don't want to see these things happen again. And when God forbid that ever happen again, we got to learn, and we got to continue to learn from history.
Well, Danny, I can't thank you enough, man. I've been looking forward to this. You were on vacation and look all tan. I like the red on the forehead. Look rested. Belize
I am
very
that.
good to you.
Yeah, Belize is very good. We better believe it, mate. Better believe.
Well, I know Billy and we really appreciate it, man. Your knowledge is great. You do an outstanding job with the Monarchs, obviously. I love your wealth of knowledge on the Negro Leagues, and I love how you share the stories during the broadcast. You know, you got a number one fan in me, all these, man. I love tuning in and listening to it, man. Keep preaching the word, man. You've got a gift that's, God's giving you a gift, man, and I'm glad you're maximizing it.
Appreciate you, mate. Much love to you. Always a pleasure.
Always, man. Tell Gay Marie I said hello.
I will.
Right.
Best
Take
to
care,
you,
buddy.
Kitty.
Thanks.
See you, mate.
See ya.